Every week on the Totally Advertising podcast, we meet with founders, CEOs, writers, and directors to talk about the creative choices that have made the biggest impact on their brands. And this isn't just any podcast because
it's totally advertising.
I'm Dallin Koski.
And I'm Damian Dallin.
It's totally rad. It's totally advertising.
And welcome to the Totally Advertising podcast. I'm Damian Dallin, the creative guy.
And I'm Dallin Koski, the performance guy.
And we're joined by our friend Zack Litwack from Fourth Quarter. Today, like every day, we talk about the intersection between creative and performance. Some podcasts talk about marketing, some talk about creative, and we want to see how the two impact each other. And we're going to start off each episode with an ad and talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, what we like about it, what we love about it, and what maybe we don't love so much. So we'll roll the first ad now.
Well, the timing's always perfect when it's time to get it up. Keep a packet in your pocket, quicker, peck or pick her up. Got a blue chew in the evening and a rocket in your pants. Wanna leave your partner smiling, don't you leave it up to chance. Blue chew, anytime the mood strikes you. Good news, harder than a bamboo shoot. Blue chew, quicker than a kangaroo. You too could use blue chew.
That's us coming back from the ad. So first of all, I just like to ask,
ED drug.
what was that?
Good old ED ad. Love it.
Yeah. So let me ask, what was your first impressions of the ad? I always like to ask this first. Did you like it? Hate it?
I thought it was okay. What's interesting is I spent quite a lot of money and quite a few years advertising ED products. And so I'm somewhat familiar with the funnel that they're probably creating. And it was kind of a catchy jingle, but it felt like a stretch.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. It felt a little too contrived, potentially. There was a lot of magic in jingles, though. It was certainly catchy. It was pretty well written. You can see well, maybe you can't see all the music stuff behind me. That's how I started my career, so I get the persuasion that music can have on you to do certain things. But
Well, I think I like to ask what I call my Super Bowl questions, which are, did you like it? Who was it for? And what do they do? And the first answer to the question was you didn't care for it too much. You're like, yeah, it's okay. But you did remember what they did, and do you remember the brand?
Blue Chew.
Yeah, so they did accomplish those objectives. I thought this one would be funny, and I thought you'd appreciate it because it was a startup, but they got this commercial made by this guy who's a musician a couple weeks before he released a song called Dirt Man, which Dirt Man went really big on TikTok as a stupid, weird song that everybody was singing and adding on to. So they probably paid him nothing and then had a huge brand lift because his site went viral the next week. But in an advertising environment, you can't really control that. So, most of us are familiar with the ED space because they appear in our spam folders. I don't love the category, but you obviously have some unique insight into their funnel and what they're trying to do. So, as a critique, what did you say they did well, and what do you say they didn't do as well?
Well, there wasn't much of a hook at the beginning. I don't know. It felt hookless to me. At least it wouldn't have. I don't know if it would have grabbed my attention scrolling through the feed. The who it was for, I think you mentioned that earlier. I have no idea. Who is it? Anybody or nobody? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
It's funny because when I marketed these products, we actually took an approach, which I don't know if it was by accident or by strategy, but we actually marketed to a very specific demo. And that demo was actually really old people that definitely needed the drug. Why not go directly after those folks? And it seemed like from this side, they're probably going for a younger demographic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Probably more my age, be my guess.
Yeah. This brand.
Which I find like an interesting strategy, but I don't know that it would be the most efficient strategy.
I think this brand isn't necessarily going for ED. It's more of like a stimulant to kind of help the experience. And they grew a lot on TikTok and started on TikTok and just did a lot of organic. And so, yeah, they're definitely speaking to a younger demographic, but it's not necessarily to like the ED customer. It's more just to, hey, when you need a little boost, you know?
It's like a supplement.
Exactly.
A different type of performance enhancing supplement than athletes might use.
Yep.
But, you know, that's a really good point about, I talk about how sometimes for agencies, cool is corrosive, which is if you try to be cool and hip with the younger generation, but your demographic isn't necessarily cool and hip and they don't necessarily care about it, they missed that demographic that you, from your experience, know is a ripe purchasing demographic, but hit a young, hip demographic, which is very cool. But we have a lot of people competing for the hip, cool products, to be the hip, cool products. And we're ignoring a huge swath of America when you try to be cool, but not useful, you know? So, you know.
I always think about too, like what persuasion levers are they pulling? Like, is there authority? No. Is there, social proof? No. Is there reciprocity? No. Like they didn't really persuade me to do anything other than listen to a catchy jingle. And then the call to action felt a little buried too at the end. I wanted to call that out.
Yeah, it didn't match the rest of the ad. And I always notice that, especially in UGC, it feels like the most effective UGC is where the brand is just showing the product. And he does that in the middle of the song, but the graphic at the end feels like, oh, this isn't authentic to this creator. They slapped on this offer at the end. But I thought it was interesting. I'm not the target demo yet, but I'm getting older. But it was catchy enough that I listened to the whole thing. When I normally get an ad like this, it goes straight to my spam folder. But there's also something interesting I see happening, and I'm going to call it the crapification of ads, which is when they decide purposefully to go low production. The green screen wasn't a high-end green screen. There wasn't a high-end compositing, but it makes it feel less like a shiny ad that's delivered in your feed. Because this guy is a TikToker and produces a lot of videos like this, I could get this ad and just think like, oh, it's another funny song. Oh, let's see what's the next Dirt Man. And instead it's an ad for this performance enhancing supplement.
I liked it. I mean, I like the ad a lot, actually. I think, it's missing some of the like key elements that we're talking about in just a boilerplate ad, hook, call to action, things like that. But when you look at all the other content that this brand is producing, it's mostly like TikTok, UGC, my husband or my boyfriend or whatever. I had such a great encounter, or, it's some guy talking about it, and this was such a totally different direction from what they've done, and they're having a lot of success. They're doing really well on TikTok. So I like that they went this route. Yeah, it's not the most high production ad, but it's a catchy jingle. They put some time into it, versus just busting out their phone and hiring some TikTok creator on TikTok Shop to get an affiliate commission. So, I like what they did. It's memorable, which I think is really what they were going for. Like the song Blue Chew is still in my head. And I think that's all they needed to do.
Kangaroo.
Yeah, that's all they needed from it, really.
I remember Get Hard as a Bamboo Shoot.
Yeah,
Blue Chew.
exactly.
Yeah,
so I feel like what they were trying to do versus like, it's hard sometimes when we critique just one ad, but when you look at it in the whole body of work that they have, like in the whole ad account or in all their content library, I like this because it takes a new direction for them. And, the purpose of the ad is really important to think about when we critique it. And I think in this case, it wasn't necessarily like click here and buy Blue Chew now. It was, you're going to remember this song. And it took us, maybe it cost us $5,000 to produce this, but you're going to remember this for a long time. And we can run it at a certain part in the funnel and then use all of our other content to make you take that action and click and buy later on. So just
they could repurpose the music, to your point.
Yeah.
And also, to your point, it might be super top of funnel. This might have been meant to just build audience.
Yeah.
To convert them lower in the funnel with the UGC stuff, with the harder call to actions, with more persuasive elements throughout it.
One of the points that I try to make, and also to be clear, when I talked about the crapification, I'm not saying that they made bad stuff. I'm saying they made a deliberate choice not to do high production value, right? They made a choice to shoot on a phone. He's a musician, but he's singing into his earbuds, you know, or into his
Which
headphones.
is so hot right now, so in right now, by the way.
Yeah, but it makes it feel like authentic. This guy's in his room. He just hung a green
Yeah.
curtain to do it. And then he comes up with this song that's fairly high production value song. And I've also said this to clients, like, listen, we can buy ads on Meta, we can buy ads on Google, on YouTube, and all these platforms. The most valuable ad space is the rent-free in people's brains. And that, I watched it and I was like, yeah, it was okay. I still remember from the first time I heard it, I still remember certain lines. There's alliteration and I can dissect it as a writer, but I remember pecker, picker, upper. And it was like these clever little things that like, that even that might be a little too crass for me as a person, it's still stuck in my head and it's looping. And I'm like, the retargeting, even if my computer's off. The
Yeah.
remarketing to me, if you have something memorable. I think that the jingle is totally underused right now in marketing. Not a lot of people are using it, but I guarantee you probably don't know the phone numbers of your 5 best friends, but there's a commercial you watched from your childhood that you still remember the number exactly because there's a jingle attached to it, right?
Reminds me like the Shane Company radio ads. Like I still remember the address, you know?
Well, another thing about Shane Company is his ads, everybody thinks Shane Company is local, but he's all over the country. And he was doing crapification before. He's like, I'm not going to have an actor. I'm going to make it look like I have not practiced. And it's just, hi, I'm Tom Shane, owner of the Shane Company. Now you have a friend in the diamond business. Like it is practiced to sound robotic. So you think he lives down the street from you and his one store in your town, you think he lives there, you know? And that's really interesting to me. Well,
Your friend in the diamond business, he's your friend.
yeah. So I'm like, oh, he's going to give me the best deal because he's my friend. We actually, that was our answering machine in high school is, you've called the Daytons. No, it's, hi, I'm Tom Shane. You've reached the Daytons. Now you have a friend of the Diamonds. Anyway. I want to move on and talk about your business, Zach. We talked last week about the cool things you're doing at fourth quarter, but we first met while you were doing performance and ad buy for Roots. Would you tell us a little bit about what Roots is and what they do?
Yeah, Roots was the genesis for this thing that's now fourth quarter. But Roots is the only real estate investment fund that builds wealth for the investors investing in the fund and also the renters that live in the buildings that the fund owns. So the renters get rebates if they follow a program that essentially is taking care of the property and paying rent on time. So they're incentivized to protect the investor's investment. So it's the only win-win investment product or investment vehicle that I know of. So it's a way to make money and to give back to the community. And yeah, we met because the co-founders of Roots had already started talking to you about helping out with some video creative. And I got to fly out to Salt Lake City. And where's the actual office? What town
We're
is
in
that called?
Orem right now, kind of like Orem, Provo area.
Yeah. So we got to go out to your office and do a brand workshop in anticipation of doing a higher budget commercial for the first time. And long story short, I knew the co-founder Daniel from my childhood, and we actually had tried to start a couple of businesses together. They both failed miserably many moons ago, and I exited my business, and it coincided with perfect timing where Daniel needed a head of growth, someone to run the acquisition engine, and I was like, sure, I'll help you with this. And
was your first reaction when you're going out to Utah, like, wait, we're going out to Utah, and who are these jokers?
Yeah, that's right. We're going out to Utah
That's the
film
hotbed of creativity.
a viral social media commercial. But yeah, so we went through a branding exercise, which was great for me because I was only a few months in. I had enough data and I ran enough tests to kind of get a baseline for like what the funnel conversion rates are. Clearly had product market fit with this amazing product. And it was nice to go out and do that brand workshop to get a better sense of what the messaging should be, not necessarily like we nailed it there, but like what the overarching brand messaging should be. And we started to tweak the way we were approaching the product messaging right away. And then a couple months later, I think, what did we do? We saw you all perform like 5 different versions of the script and picked a script and filmed it and got to launch it April, May of last year. And it's been definitely our best performing top of funnel asset. Also got some like explainer videos that we're using in funnel too with a lot of success.
Well, that's awesome. I feel like we were incredibly lucky to have you running the campaign, because sometimes clients will do explainers and they just like, well, those are nice, we can send them in emails. But you guys really have used, those were kind of high-end shooting, but we didn't have like fireworks going off. But there was so much intricacy in what Roots is doing, because you've got the investor end where they're investing and seeing a return on their investment, but helping renters understand that not only will you not lose your deposit, you can actually make money by being a good steward of the home that you're living in, and that mutually beneficial relationship. And there was a lot of nuance there, and it's something we just couldn't do like in a 15-second jingle.
Yeah,
definitely would have been.
That's right. Although maybe we'll do the Roots jingle. Maybe Blue Chew has inspired us. You know, it's funny. A renter actually, or no, it was an investor, actually sent us a jingle, and it was. I should have pulled it up. I'd have to find it. It wasn't bad. It wasn't bad. Something about the Living It Like You Own It program, which is the program that renters run. She rhymed it with like, I don't remember. I'd have to pull it up, but.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that the experience out in Provost was awesome, and so Roots was an interesting guinea pig of sorts. I didn't know what I wanted to do after I exited my last business, which was a venture operator based here in Nashville. We invested and acquired mostly digital media companies, and then would launch direct consumer brands from the audience that already had affinity. So it gave me a lot of experience running large audience acquisition, running very high budget campaigns, and running hundreds of experiments per week across our portfolio of assets, which was a good training grounds for me, really refining our process of experimentation. And when I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but when I started working with Roots, I realized that I was solving a huge pain point for Daniel, the co-founder. He kind of has a marketing background, like a lot of founders. He's worn all the hats, and he had signals of product market fit. He had his first 100 or so investors, and he was about to launch full scale direct consumer, like where anybody across America could go invest in this investment vehicle for as little as $100. But he didn't really know what to start. He was starting to talk to some marketing agencies, probably why he started talking to Creatably about creating some content that we could test, and then having someone else deploy the content, I suppose. He was in the process, I believe, of interviewing a couple of like head of gross, but I was able to plug in and take care of all those worries for him. And I contractually actually couldn't get paid at the time because I was still winding down finishing the deal with my old company. And so it so happened that I kind of walked into this fourth quarter model via Roots. And so we've been growing Roots over the last year and a half. And
I just want to interrupt you for just a little bit. I think what's fascinating is you talk about how he had a marketing background, and I feel like there's a huge difference between somebody with a marketing background or even a PhD in marketing and somebody with a performance background who's been running a lot of actionable tests on a regular basis and boots on the ground. And there's this kind of academic world of marketing and ideas that are good, but then you get in and start marketing and you're actually doing it. There's quite a difference between that and performance. So tell us what you're doing with fourth quarter now.
Yeah, so I plugged into Roots as the head of growth. I couldn't get paid, so I was just like, well, I'll just work for equity essentially. And we grew it thanks in part to the content that we created together, but just through experimentation and a wonderful product that had great product market fit that he put together. That's just a wonderful idea that hasn't been created before. And so I realized, or I awoke to the fact that there were probably other founders like Daniel. And in fact, through my network, some started reaching out to me and had these same pain points that Daniel had. Hey, I've been burned by a marketing agency, or hey, we have product market fit now, or product market I call it product market fit signals, where a startup might have 20, 30, 40, 50 initial customers. Let's call it 50 to a couple $100,000 in revenue. And they're like, okay, now what do I do? They were stuck. They thought their options were hire a marketing agency or try to find the right head of growth to come in and help them grow it. And both processes or both options are time consuming. They're risky too for a startup that doesn't have a ton of money. And I came up with this idea of, hey, what if we know how to grow startups really well. What if we develop kind of a startup incubator ecosystem of sorts, where we actually plugged in as the startup's head of growth, and knowing that they can't take on a lot of risk, we'll actually pay for everything and acquire upside in the business and through ongoing rev share and equity accrual over time. So essentially, we're like part VC and part growth operator for the startup.
Now
and so far we've partnered with a couple startups and including Roots, and seen a lot of success.
Yeah, and we've had some experiences where we've invested in some of our clients, but this is core to your business model, where you're looking for startups with positive signal, positive growth signal, and you're actively partnering, investing, and rev sharing with them as you do their growth. Is that correct?
That's right. We're like a marketing agency. We're like a startup marketing agency that invests in the startup. We invest our time, we invest our money, and we're growth partners for the founder. And it's in collaboration with the founder. You know, they're glued into our core process, which we call high tempo testing. It's our experimentation process.
So I want to hear about your high tempo testing. I get the sense as a marketer, you're definitely a tester where you're running a lot of tests and stuff. But I also, you mentioned signal, the term that you use to kind of vet good clients and good partners for you. What are you guys looking for in signal? Because, 30, 40 clients, we love clients that are in their, I would say their sophomore year. That might not be chronologically, but they've like kind of figured out their product market fit, but we can just help them really ramp up and grow quickly. I think you're approaching people a little bit earlier, but you've got some interesting ways of figuring out that they're showing some traction really early on, and there's early signals that they're ripe for growth.
Yeah, it's hard to quantify because it's almost like intuition meets some data, but it's not as scientific as I'd want it to be. I'll tell you a couple of examples though. There's a great startup called Bitify, and sorry, you might hear my 3-year-old running around. She's got home from school, I think. There's a great startup called Bitify that, like a lot of startups, are trying to do stuff in AI, except their generative AI they built is super impactful for SMBs that are doing a lot of RFPs. RFPs are extremely time consuming, and they built generative AI that decreases the time by like 80-90%.
Wow.
So all of a sudden it took a company 40 hours, or even if they were using a vendor to do everything for them, let's call it $6,000-$7,000 an RFP. Now Bitify is doing it for $1,000 an RFP. And they're doing so many of them, they had a great offer where they would guarantee a win in the batch of RFPs you purchased, or else they'll do more for you until they were able to achieve a win for you. So kind of like the fourth quarter model where it's really no risk.
So you like their model.
Was doing no risk.
You like their model. You like the product that they're offering. But what were you seeing from them as far as performance-wise? Because
the founder threw up, who has no marketing background. Daniel had a little. This founder has none. He threw up Google Ads with probably with like all the stock settings. He probably used the like when you first create a Google Ads account,
the
for a brand, the guide, the tutorial, it's not even recommendations. You don't even go to the AdWords, or it's not called AdWords anymore, but Google Ads backend, where you're just like, the tutorial's like, what type of business do you have? And you just like click buttons, and he threw that up. So it was just like broad match, paid search off of like RFPs, and he was getting leads and customers.
Nice.
So it's very poor execution. That's like product market fit signals to me. But in general, if a startup has the founder just needs to figure out how to get that initial 20, 30, 40 customers, prove out that this is a product that people want to purchase, that is solving a core need of theirs. And at that point in time, we can start the conversation.
Yeah. So one question I have for you, Zach, is, you mentioned the background that you have with, you mentioned a number like 100 experiments a week or 1,000 a week or something. I feel like that's kind of in contrast to going with like a big bet on a Creatably piece of creative, for a startup. How do you kind of combine the two? Like we always say every ad is a bet, essentially. And I feel like things are shifting now, where they used to be very like tons of variant testing, tons of like little micro experiments in an ad account. And now things are a lot more simplified, and people are kind of moving more towards that higher quality, more thoughtful type of creative, trying to kind of hedge their bets a little bit more. Instead of going wide, they're going deeper with quality. Are you seeing some of that, or how do you kind of, break down the growth that, how do you reconcile the experiment kind of methodology with that need for better creative now?
Yeah, so the process that I alluded to earlier called high tempo testing kind of takes care of the prioritization, because everything is weighted by what's called an ICE score, which is I didn't invent the ICE score. It was invented by some OG Silicon Valley marketers, but I've kind of adapted it and made it my own, or suit our purposes, working with primarily earlier stage startups and having a portfolio of them. So we're working on a handful at a time. And out of that process, you prioritize everything off of the ICE score. So the impact is, how much money will this test generate us over the course of a year, or how many leads, or whatever your North Star metric is? How impactful will it be to the business? Your second one is confidence. So you value internal confidence more than external confidence. Internal confidence would be like, we ran a test that points to this working. So that would be a higher score. Versus external confidence might be, I heard my friend's business, who's in a totally different industry, do a Creatably ad and they crushed it. Right. And which is kind of the case of Roots. We had some external confidence because you all worked with another investment product, not in real estate, but another one. And they had seen a lot of success. And then the last one, which is also very important, is the ease score. How much time and money is this going to take? So with like the Creatably commercial, the ease score is really low. Let's call it a 2, maybe. Mm-hmm. Lots of time, lots of money. The I, though, however, was like a 10. I mean, if this works, we're getting thousands of customers from this over the course of a year. And the confidence was like middle of the road. So it was a borderline. I score it that way, and we prioritized it against everything else we had going for us. And it scored a little better in that sprint than all the other rest of them. So we moved forward. And then there are also a lot of that impact score is challenging sometimes, because there's a lot of like, you're valuing just the initial test, but there's a lot of other pieces of content you get from this one piece of content you're doing that you kind of have to value too. So that's why the impact is so high. Is that helpful?
Totally.
And so I didn't directly answer your question, but that way you're kind of weighing all the aspects of the potential for the business, and you average them together to get the ICE score. Yeah. And some tests, the E will be really high because we're just doing a UGC video internally, and we're going to slap it on CapCut with our animations we created, and it takes like 20 seconds, call it a day. But some are going to be like, let's go shoot a Creatably commercial, and you kind of have to make the ICE score forces you to make both bets.
So with the ICE score, you look at your UGC and you're like, we have a high confidence that we'll make our money back. It doesn't cost us much money to make this, but we're not going to break out of the noise. We're not going to be a sensation, but we'll probably get a return on our investment.
Yeah, impact would be lower.
Your impact will be lower.
Yeah.
Impact would be lower for sure. So the C has to do with internal versus external confidence. It doesn't have to do with how confident we are. The confidence is, how confident are we that it's going to prove out the hypothesis we have in the test. Okay. And then the impact is how impactful it'll be, and the ease is how much time and money it will take.
Yeah, I like that framework, because I think that's a big question a lot of brands and a lot of marketers in particular are asking themselves. Like, I think most people that are sophisticated are pretty dialed in on budgets and, your media mix and everything like that. And now the big question is, all right, I need more creative, and I need the creative to be high quality so that it stands out, like Damian said. And how do I build that into my, how do I prioritize what assets to develop and kind of forecast for that, and think about how many,
Yeah, another way to answer your question, or another insight that you could have through this high tempo testing process, is you can run what I call like minimal viable tests. So if you really want to test a bigger budget Creatably commercial, let's say, but you wanted to do, and we knew kind of like what script we wanted to test. Like we had some of the project dialed in with the budget. A minimal viable the ice score might force yourself to run what I call a minimal viable test, which would be like, how do we do a $10,000 or a $5,000 version of that to just do some initial testing? And so the ease score there would be a lot higher. The confidence would be maybe a little lower because it won't be quite as polished. The hook won't be quite as tight and stuff, but and the impact would be lower too. And so, but that could be a way for you to get the score that you need to actually, to get your feet wet with that style. And then
that's definitely one of the challenges we have is we talk to clients that are like, well, can we do something cheap first to test that this will work? And we're like, that's one of the variables that makes this impactful is doing something for Roots. It was a room full of millionaires in a mansion. Like that's kind of harder to test on a phone. Like we had to create the appearance of wealth, or if we're blowing up a car, or if we're having a bear maul somebody.
Totally.
It's like there's a cheap way to do that, but you're not testing the variable that will be in place on this ad for those big top of the funnel that should last longer in your funnel and perform for, at least 18 months, if not 2 to 3 years for you.
But I also think like the testing for a brand like Roots, I feel like there's so many different ways to message that. We call like an ad concept. It's like your audience and your angle and kind of all that mix, your offer and all of that. And so you can do the MVP testing, to your point, Zach, where you're maybe more testing angles, and then that can maybe increase your confidence score for like, we've unlocked these 3 angles are really driving performance. Now let's go with the impact with a higher quality long form ad where we can put all 3 of these angles into one big, piece of creative.
Yeah, and we had done enough testing that informed, some feedback on the script too, via like angles we knew that worked. And so it's definitely nice to have a lot of data going into it. But yeah, that's exactly right. It would increase our confidence if we do that, like this angle works, this CTA works. It certainly increased the confidence of layering those into the higher budget commercial.
One question too,
and Damian, you brought up a good point. The higher budget commercial is almost like you have to look at the impact over more than 1 year, because we're still using the asset. In fact, the asset is starting to pick up steam on YouTube for the first time. I mean, really pick up steam. We've been running it on YouTube, and we're like a year, we're not quite a year later, but we're almost at a year now.
Yeah, I think with a higher budget asset, a lot of people, a lot of marketers and CMOs look at it as a sunken cost instead of a budget generator. I like to think about it that way, because you're like, no, this is an asset, not a liability for your company. That this asset should produce more budget for your department over the course of 2 to 3 years. And we need to have a personal follow-up where we're talking about how you're doing things on YouTube to ramp that up, because you've had the video for over a year, where it's performed for you fairly well on meta properties. But I'm also just seeing a lot of consumer behavior shift to YouTube right now. And that's where I kind of see things going, just because on meta properties, people are on the reels and the shorts or in the stories. And you're not seeing a lot of consumer behavior there. Where we're seeing the consumer behavior is on the feed, but Facebook users are not spending time on their feed anymore. And I think on YouTube, you're getting a mix of both of those things. But that's just a theory. I don't have a lot of data to support that yet. But
it just goes back to testing. We had to run like 50 tests on YouTube to really dial it in. Everything from audience testing to how we're optimizing to what placements we're excluding. That actually was the biggest one we had. Is I didn't even know this. Our rep gave us this is a little technical. Our rep gave us a script to like that automatically excludes app and partner placements.
Nice.
So like that was huge. So now we're just being placed on YouTube, and obviously the traffic's a lot higher quality. We're spending enough to start to optimize for later in the funnel too. So the algorithm's starting to pick up.
Yeah, and
it's a confluence of a lot of different factors through a lot of different experiments that all of a sudden it's like compounding. All of a sudden it's starting to it's like AI compounding over the last 70 years.
I think a big part of using any platform is knowing every single platform has a batch of crap placements that they can
Yeah.
increase your volume,
Yeah.
but you know that they're not going to produce like partner
That's
and
right.
app, and that's true of Facebook
Audience
too.
network.
Like,
Although Meta doesn't really place much on audience network anymore,
Yeah.
but it used to quite a bit. It used to a lot more, at least.
Yeah. Well, at least with Meta, you have like cost caps and bid caps where you say, you know, it used to be just like spend my money and we hope for the best. And you just monitoring the performance on the CPAs and ROAS. At least now you can say, all right, if you're going to spend my money, you can go to Audience Network if you want, but you know you have to get a purchase under this cost. And so then you just see it naturally avoid those placements that, you know, are not good.
well, what I find interesting though on Meta is that we're seeing lower CPMs on those, you know, TikTok-like experience, but the purchase behavior seems more in feed. But the sidebar, which is in the same experience as the feed, I just never see much performance there. I almost always exclude. I'm not an ad buyer anymore. I was 10 years.
Oh
10
man, you're
years
talking
ago.
about sidebar. Talking about sidebar. I remember when it was just sidebar placement. That's all the ad inventory they had many moons ago.
So let me ask you this simple question, Zach. You're a highly scientific, data-driven guy. I'm a creative guy. If you had to place bets, would you rather place it on a campaign that your gut tells you is going to work, or budget to run 100 tests?
I would take diversification, but I will say this, and the marketers today have to be, are the great marketers today are part scientists and part artists, is the way it's like the science and art. You need to have a blend of both. And the cool thing about experimentation and being more scientific, it actually ironically creates a lot of room for creativity, because you're basically saying like you're putting guardrails around everything with the ice score, but it's really wide guardrails. It creates room to do big commercials with Creatably, and all the way down to just doing a subject line test on email. So it's and I'm like, I was a musician and a producer, so I didn't realize it at the time, but my creativity actually was very mathematical, and I think there's a lot of connection there. But where was I going with that? It's very mathematical. So yeah, I think actually they're very similar, you know, and they're maybe they're different modes you need to shift into, but the marketers today have to be part artist and part scientist, because the creative does drive. The creative is your vehicle to be a scientist almost. It's like, I don't know. You need both.
Well, like most artists will tell you they hate constraints. Like, I want to be able to create anything. But if you tell artists to create anything, they won't. But if you're like, make something out of this bottle, this pen, and a brown paper bag, and then that's a challenge that makes them thrive. And sometimes the constraints unlock parts of your creativity. Like, how do I do something with these limited assets? And then you see 5 artists create completely different things out of those 5 assets.
And I feel like, to your question, follow up, Damian, I feel like, you know, with Zach, you're working with a lot of, you know, more early stage brands and businesses. And I feel like at that point, just out of necessity, you kind of have to be more in experiment mode, you know, but there are, I think, a pretty good argument for brands that get to that, you know, Damian calls it like junior, sophomore year, something like that, where it does make sense to go, you know, the other way. So I think right now you're in that almost out of necessity, that mode of, okay, we've got to really make every dollar maximized, and we have to be really careful with the bets that we're taking. So we're going to go with what we know that works and is easy to produce, and just go wide and figure out those angles. And then eventually, once you get enough cash, you can take those bigger swings that will have that bigger impact score, you know.
Yeah, and the score kind of takes care of itself in that sense, because as you grow, iterative gains on day 100 of testing could be like doubling the business.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. But iterative gains now for Roots is like, you know, we're a year and a half in now, you know, 10,000 plus customers. It's pretty small. And so, yeah, you do have to start, but the I score takes care of itself. Like, an iterative test is going to be really low impact, and thus those tests won't score nearly as well now that they used to.
Yeah.
And so we're going to have to start to look at at taking bigger swings, bigger bets.
Yeah, you said bigger swings, and I'm going to do something stupid now and use a sports analogy because I'm not a great sports guy. But I think as you're playing baseball early in your career, you want to see as many pitches as you can, right? And that's, I think, your iterative testing. You want to see as many pitches as you can. But once you know, like, low and on the outside is where you can have hit home runs before, then you're looking for that pitch. Then you're swinging for that pitch, and you're letting a lot more pitches go by, where I think early on you have to swing at more things because you don't know where your capability is to hit. And those iterative testings are really important to set you up for that position to swing for those home runs.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we look for those sophomore year companies. It's otherwise we have to put in every feature that your product has instead of knowing, like, out of all of our features, this is the one that's, or we use instinct and gut to say, like, you've told me about the 70 things that your product does. This one resonates with me as a consumer. And so I'm going to swing for the fences on this one, but it's a lot better if you know I'm best at hitting wide and outside versus, I don't know, where other pitches go. Wide and outside is a baseball term.
You nailed it.
Familiar.
You nailed it until you said, I don't know. You crushed that analogy.
And then you're like, oh, he got lucky. There's
No.
a pitching machine.
Zach, I have a just selfish question here that I'm curious about with Roots. You mentioned just specifically to their business model, you're targeting, investors that want to invest in, like, an apartment complex. And then you're also targeting renters. And I can't think of, like, they're two widely different audiences. How do you kind of think about your creative? Like, are you guys trying to drive more renters into the funnel or more investors, or are you just going after both? Like, who's kind of the target audience? How are you targeting them?
So far, it's been investors.
Okay.
We are going to start to do more renter acquisition. We're actually, and Roots is getting fun too because we're about to launch more products. It's been the one REIT investment product, just targeting investors. Now we've got it. Now we've built an audience. If you want to look at it through, like, a media lens of people that are really interested in making these types of investments. And so now we're going to offer them more products, including we are experimenting with. And so going back to iterative experimentation, like, for our investor funnel, we kind of have to start thinking bigger, different content, different channels, right? And there's a lot more. I'm not saying, like, we've exhausted the Facebook and Meta, the Meta and Google tap. We could double or triple that side of the business just off of those two channels. But now we get to launch new products to new audiences, and so we're going to start that iterative experimentation all over again, almost, which is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
One of the things that's mind-blowing for me about Roots, that I love about it, is home ownership is harder now than it ever was for somebody right out of college. But with Roots, I can invest in the apartment complex where I'm living in. And so I'm seeing financial windfall as that property becomes more valuable, as other renters pay. But then as a renter, I'm also double dipping because if I'm taking care of the property instead of losing my deposit, I'm also seeing windfall there. And so you can actually, where it used to be the only way to build equity and value in where you lived is if you bought a home. But now I can rent an apartment and make a long-term bet, and my rent isn't just disappearing into a hole. I can be investing regularly into this and seeing disbursements come to me. And I know that's not the right term for them, but I'm getting money back.
No, you're exactly right. I mean, the product itself is awesome, and the fact that investors across America, anybody across America, can now invest in a portfolio of residential real estate assets for as little as $100, with knowing also that the renters and all the properties also get to build wealth alongside of you by taking care of the property and paying rent on time. And now we are not only launching a way for the renters that aren't living in our buildings to start to build rebates and essentially rewards is what we're going to call it, renter rewards, to buy some of our products, to invest in the fund. But we are very close to going out to market with a B2B product, actually. So totally new sales motion for us, right? With new sets of experiments that'll coincide, which is a lot of fun. But we're going to sell the software we built internally to manage that Living It Like You Own It, the renter wealth building product, to other property owners in a SaaS type of situation.
Wow, fascinating.
Cool.
So we're going to give hopefully hundreds of thousands more renters the opportunity to participate in the Roots REIT, just like the renters do in our owned and operated buildings.
That's cool. It's really cool.
That's amazing.
I have another question for you, Zach. On the performance side, you mentioned, just with Roots, Meta, Google, there's still tons of, green grass to explore and a lot of room to grow. What other channels are you guys experimenting with and seeing success with, especially coming off, this is the week that there was sort of the TikTok ban. And so
TikTok went away and came back.
And so people are, already increasing spend on Meta, or at least they were over the weekend, expecting more inventory there. And now it's back. But what other channels are you guys experimenting with and seeing success on?
So the first thing I'll say is I've built pretty large startups just off of Meta. There are 3 billion active users. So I wouldn't, scurry off to other channels if you don't have to. The way I do my kind of budget and resources, which I think is a decent rule of thumb, even as you grow, is about 5% of your budget. Let's say you have $1 million quarterly budget to spend on ads and content. About 5% of that goes towards other channels. Just to take, and it's really taking similar content or tweaked content, knowing what the channel is. So it's repurposing content too. So it's very low budget, just to start dipping your toe in the waters. Because the reason startups fail, outside of not having a team like Fourth Quarter helping you grow it, is lack of focus. And so, especially on the growth side of the business, I guess you can make the same argument for the product side of the business too. Lack of focus. One want the right product, right offer, the right channel can make hundreds of millions of dollars. I've seen it happen before. That being said, Roots now is at a point where we are starting to take that 5% and dipping our toe in other waters. One of them being TikTok. We were actually, it's so funny, we're about to stand up like a little micro influencer campaign with a handful that we found as like an organic test. And we were also about to start testing, which I think we still will at this point, running some paid on TikTok with some of the content that's from one of our, what we call luminaries, or
A thought leader.
More kind of like famous partners, have a big social media following, taking that content that has worked well on Reels and Instagram and taking it to TikTok with some tweaks. Another channel that I've always used, at least for remarketing, is native. So like Taboola, Outbrain, especially if your brand is creating blog post or listicle type of content, those channels are great for remarketing. If you get scaled out enough, you can actually scale them algorithmically too. But that's why I keep it for remarketing for Roots, just because of that 5% rule that we have right now.
Yeah.
And then I haven't tested it myself, but a lot of media buyer friends of mine are really liking AppLovin.
Yeah.
Although, it's like the hot new thing. Maybe we'll test that. But right now for Roots, it's really just some Reddit, some native, some TikTok would be the other 3.
That's awesome. Cool.
And obviously email and SMS are primary channels in funnel.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I want to thank you, Zach, for joining us. Our time is kind of coming to a close. And thank you for your in-depth analysis and insight. If you're a startup and you're seeing some early growth signal, how can they contact you?
Go to fourthquarter.com. You can find me on LinkedIn too, Zack Litwack, ZACLITWACK.
Awesome. And if you're interested in hearing more at the Total Advertising Podcast, feel free to submit ads to be reviewed and critiqued. Or if you're interested in being a guest, reach out to us and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you're catching your pods. See you next time.
Totally rad. It's totally rad.
Join us every week right here on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, or wherever you listen to stuff for your pods.